This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
So the journey didn't end there for you, did it? What happened then?
So I went through my SIBO treatment, typical type A personality. I was like, I'm going to do this the best. I'm going to be the best patient she's ever seen. I'll do it the fastest.
What do you know about the link between eating disorders and SIBO?
I think it's an interesting link, and it's a real chicken and the egg.
What does that mean to be a disordered food person?
I can get very obsessive with food.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? Welcome to the Expert Series, where you'll meet 25 of the world leaders in health and wellness, discussing their passions and what it takes to make your shift.
There's an electrical feeling in the room.
I had to be a mom. It was so important to me.
I've always been a pain in the butt, and I love that.
I knew that I wanted to help people.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift.
Hi, I'm Katherine Maslen, naturopath, author and host of The Shift. In the Expert Series, we share the insight, stories and expertise of each of our amazing experts. You might have heard them on season 1 of The Shift, where we took snippets of these interviews and put them together into the series for you. If you haven't listened to season 1 yet, I'd highly recommend listening to episode 1 of this podcast to get the latest on what it takes to make a shift in your gut health. We'll provide a link in the show notes. In this episode, we have Rebecca Coombes. Rebecca is a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth health advocate, a speaker, author, and host of the Healthy Gut podcast. Rebecca's story and recipes have been shared far and wide across many podcasts, media outlets and magazines. For anyone that's lived with SIBO, they will know that the dietary changes needed can be quite intense. So Rebecca's cookbooks are a breath of fresh air to those that need to heal from the condition. There's a lot in this episode, but I want you to listen out for Rebecca's real and raw journey that led to her SIBO diagnosis, the emotional aspects of SIBO and how we can look at SIBO holistically. Now, in this episode, there are some sensitive topics like eating disorders and sexual abuse. So if listening to this brings up anything for you, please reach out to your support, or if you're in Australia, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14. First of all, I get Rebecca to introduce herself.
My name is Rebecca Coombes, and I am the founder of The Healthy Gut, and I specialise in working with people with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and I take them from feeling really overwhelmed and miserable with their digestive issues to feeling like they have confidence and they can live their life once again. I'm from Melbourne. I grew up in Melbourne. I'm born and bred Melbourne, and ended up living overseas for many years as well. So I've got had a wonderful life of travelling and living in Australia.
Yeah, whereabouts overseas?
I lived in the UK for 7 years, and it was really when I was in the UK that I started to connect the body and all of my symptoms and realise that I wasn't living the healthiest life that I could live, and really connecting the piece between food and gut, because I'd never, ever in my life before that thought about what I ate equaled how I felt.
Yeah. What was the moment that you made that realisation?
It was finding a female doctor who specialised in endometriosis, and I had discovered I had endometriosis when I was living in the UK, and I was off for my 3rd surgery in as many years, and she was my new doctor, and before she cut into me, she said to me, I know that my ladies have a lot of troubles with gluten and dairy. I don't know why. Bearing in mind, this is back in the early 2000s, so knowledge around why food caused so many problems wasn't as good as it is today. And she said, before we operate, I want you to exclude gluten and dairy from your diet strictly for 3 months, and let's see what it does to your endo symptoms. And within hours of cutting gluten and dairy out, I was feeling better. Within a couple of days, I felt like a brand new woman. And it was only when I accidentally ate some gluten and I was in absolute agony, to the point I nearly took myself to hospital because I was in excruciating pain from eating gluten. And it was that moment that I thought, oh, this is what food can do to you. And I never knew that gluten was a problem for me before that.
Why do you think it took you so long to realise it?
I think because I was young, I was, living life and travelling. And because I was young, I didn't have as many symptoms as perhaps I have now. I didn't have the same life experience. I wasn't as connected with my body as I was now. And because I had always eaten gluten and dairy, there had never been a moment in time when I'd had a break from it. I was that classic cereal or toast for breakfast, a bread roll or a sandwich for lunch, and maybe pasta for dinner. So I had gluten coming into my system 2 to 3 times a day, every single day. And I just didn't ever have a break to identify that there was something going wrong. And I thought it was normal to feel complete exhaustion at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because so many of my colleagues would all be down in the kitchen making strong coffees and grabbing biscuits and chocolates, trying to keep ourselves going for the afternoon slump. So I thought that was just normal.
So let's rewind a little bit and see, with your story, what happened at the start. Were you born naturally?
I was born vaginally, but 2 months premature. I wasn't breastfed. My mum and I were both very sick when I was born, and mum wasn't able to breastfeed me, unfortunately. Also, back in 1978, when I was born, the doctors made comments like formula is better for preemies. And so there was no encouragement for mum and her body to try and breastfeed me. So I was put straight on dairy and formula, which I reacted really violently to. So I was an incredibly colicky, sick baby. And then I had a lot of antibiotic therapy as well because I was constantly sick and my immune system was obviously compromised being so early. And that really set me up for the life I've had.
And as a child, were you sick much?
I was sick constantly. So every single cold and flu season that came around, I would be in bed for at least 2 weeks, if not longer. And on top of that winter illness, I would also then get some kind of other illness, something quite strange. So I ended up with hepatitis A. I had glandular fever 3 times. The first time I was pretty much out of action for 6 months. I got chickenpox so extremely that they were going to document it because it was more like smallpox. So every condition I got the worst version of it. And so my whole childhood was spent sick pretty much. It just went from me going from one illness to the next, one round of antibiotics to the next. I really identified as a sick kid. Everybody saw me as a sick kid because that's all I was.
And then what about as a teenager? Was it the same kind of story?
It was the same for me all the way through until London. When I first moved to London and I got exposed to all of those new germs and bacteria and the tube. And I also started going out with a guy who was a school teacher in a pretty low socioeconomic school. So he would come home with things that he didn't get sick by them, but I was wiped out. So my first 12 months in the UK were literally every 2 weeks I was sick. And then my immune system started to really kick in and thrive. And I noticed that as I stayed in the UK, my immune system got stronger and I no longer spent every winter completely wiped out.
So tell me, what other health problems have you had over the years?
I've been pretty lucky with, I haven't broken too many things. I've broken fingers and toes, but nothing else. And then the other component that I've experienced has definitely been mental health issues, predominantly caused by being sexually abused by my uncle as a child, extreme bullying that I experienced at school, but also having chronic illness. I think that really has a big impact on your mental health. And so experiencing depression and anxiety, and now knowing that when I'm eating, if I eat gluten and dairy, I am going to have an anxiety attack, and not knowing that my food was really impacting me. I was bulimic when I was in my teens, so I'd binge and purge, particularly on sweet, highly processed or, savoury, highly processed foods like chips and lollies. And so I'd go into these binge and purge phases, and that food will give me anxiety. But then I was getting anxiety from what I was doing. So I was in a really vicious cycle. And I'm sure that did not help my gut and my digestive tract. And it is no wonder, with all of the things that I've experienced, that I ended up with such a bad gut by the time I got to my mid-30s, because I just didn't do anything to help it.
How long did you have bulimia for, or some kind of eating disorder?
Well, I've been disordered with my food for as long as I can remember, and I still categorise myself as a disordered food person. I've got it under control at the moment, but it will be something that I think I need to manage my whole life.
What does that mean to be a disordered food person?
I can get very obsessive with food, and I am that classic type A person. I am all or nothing. I'm either 100% or I'm 0%. I find moderation really difficult. At the moment, I am 100% into being really clean with my food and not drinking alcohol. And that is a form of disordered eating because I don't allow slips. And so I've recognised that is something that I need to be very mindful of. Obviously, at the moment, it's considered healthy, but I have to be very conscious of how I approach food. When I was about 13, 14, I had repressed my memories of the sexual abuse, and it all started to come back to me, mainly because my uncle, who had been out of my life for a couple of years, returned. And as he returned, memories resurfaced. And that was a really challenging period for me because I thought I was going insane. Who on earth is going to... Why would I be thinking these horrific things about my uncle? So I thought that I was going mad. And at the same time, I was being bullied really badly at school. I was being beaten up and bullied and excluded. And the only thing I could control was my food. And so I did. So I would come home from a horrible day at school where no one had spoken to me, and I would just binge and binge and binge and binge and then go and vomit everything up. And that was a cycle that lasted for many years. And by the time I got into my 20s, I had started to realise that it wasn't something I wanted to do, and I was actively trying to help myself get out of it. But when I'd go into periods of high stress, or if a relationship broke down, if I'd been dumped by a guy, I'd find myself doing it. It was like my go-to place to feel like I had control again. But, since getting into my 30s and now I'm 40, I haven't felt the urge to do that now for a good decade. So it's been good to feel like I've kind of got over the top of that particular component of my disordered eating.
What was it like being a teenager and having that constant battle, like with food and with all of those emotions that were going on for you?
I think it's really challenging as a teenager anyway, but to then be a teenager that's trying to deal in secret with disordered eating, the fact that you're an abuse survivor and that you're being bullied, it's really tough. I was suicidal for a long period of that time, and I felt like I had no self-worth. It was a really tough period, and I also didn't feel that I had anyone to talk to. And this is in the 90s. There wasn't the education that there is now, and I think one of the most important things we can do with young people is talk about these things. Unfortunately, when I first tried to disclose what had happened to me, it wasn't taken well by my family, and the words were, "We don't believe you." They meant to say, "We can't believe it happened," but the wrong words came out. So, I found it really difficult to then open up to anybody about what had happened to me. So I internalized it all and then, obviously found that I was doing a lot of harm to myself. But what I'm really passionate about today and why I talk about it today is that I want, even if there's one person that can listen to me and think, oh gosh, I'm not alone with the experiences that I've had. If Rebecca can talk about it, maybe I can talk about it with someone. And sharing my experience has helped me so much overcome what I went through.
As you would know, you're not alone, and there's so many people that have similar stories but often don't really talk about it or don't process it or just bury it. What's been your process of healing through this and being able to sort of be at peace with it and come out the other side?
I've invested in a lot of psychological support. So when I was in London, I really went off the deep end. Drugs were very cheap to come by. I was self-medicating through taking a lot of recreational drugs and drinking extremely heavily. I was drinking 5 to 7 days a week. And one of my girlfriends said to me once, "I don't have the skills to help you. When you get wasted, you talk about what happened to you, and I don't know how to help you with that. I think you need to go and speak to somebody. And it was a really confronting conversation to have, but it was the best thing that could have been said to me, because I then started this journey of finding psychologists who could work with me. So that's been part of the piece, and I've worked with 3 really amazing but different psychologists now, and I've lent in and out of it as I've felt I've needed it. And since then, it's just been literally a case of, putting the pieces back together, working with an amazing psychologist. And sadly, I think it's sad to realise that I'm not the only person that's been abused by their uncle, which horrifies me. But finding strength in that as well, and, speaking to others and hearing their stories and realising that, we can be strong as people that have been abused, and it doesn't mean that our life has to be over. And now I really look at it that I owe it to my little self, my young girl self, the 3-year-old who started when, I first started to be abused. I owe it to her to live the best life that I can live, despite what that cretin did to me. And if I wallow in self-pity, then I'm not doing her a service. But if I am strong and live my best life, then somehow it makes it okay for her.
Do you acknowledge an emotional link between the physical stuff that's going on for you and the emotional trauma you've had in the past?
Oh, totally. It's totally connected to each other. And I can see the significant emotional impact that has had on my life. There are times when I'm really angry about it. I wish that I had the average life and I wasn't abused, and that I didn't end up with what I think is some compromised approaches to things. It's impacted my relationship with men, and I've put myself into some pretty dodgy situations in the past. But then I also acknowledge that if I hadn't have had all of these experiences, I wouldn't be right here today. And as hard as those experiences have been, they're allowing me to do something special with my life. And I'm helping thousands of people around the world because I now have a voice to help others. And whilst I'm working with people with digestive illness, so many of us are abuse survivors. And there is a big link. I'm seeing there's a big link between gut trauma and dysbiosis and emotional trauma. And so as hard as it has been, I'm thankful for everything that's happened to me to get me to where I am today. Now, that hasn't been easy to get to that point of thanks, but I now am really grateful and thankful that I've had the opportunity to experience this, because I have strength that maybe somebody else wouldn't have. And I didn't commit suicide because I needed to be here for a reason, and I'm really happy I'm here.
I'm happy you're here too. And thank you so much for sharing that with me, because it does take bravery, A, to look at your stuff and to dig that up and to actually examine that, but B, to share it with the world as well. So I really commend you for that. That's amazing. What do you know about the link between eating disorders and SIBO?
I think it's an interesting link, and it's a real chicken and the egg. I've had gut issues my whole life. I remember as a very young little girl saying, "Mummy, my tummy feels funny." And I've had food sensitivities since day one. I question, did SIBO come first, or did the disordered eating come first to lead to the SIBO? I suspect SIBO came first. There's a really interesting piece of research being done by Diane Ryan, who works with people with eating disorders, and she's studying whether SIBO precludes eating disorders or whether eating disorders create SIBO. And I think it will be a mix. But having been disordered with my eating, having bulimia, or that binging and purging, has definitely disrupted my digestive tract. Having extreme anxiety disrupts your digestive tract. I know that suffering from, huge panic attacks puts you into that fight and flight mode. That disrupts the ability to digest your food. So, my whole life I've really been experiencing issues with my digestive tract. But also, when you are going on this merry-go-round of restricted diets, so it started with the no gluten and dairy, and then I went vegetarian, then I became quite strictly vegan. That's also a common hallmark for disordered eating. Young women who restrict foods on the basis of health. And so then I was restricting such huge categories of food that were starving my microbiome, and I thought I was being healthy. So, I've really had many, many years to disrupt my gut. And it's amazing that my gut is not in a worse shape today than what it could be. And I've had my diversity and assessed through uBiome, and it was sitting at 62% at last test. And my naturopathic physician that I was working with, Dr. Jason Horolek, he was like, I'm amazed. I thought you'd be way lower. 62% is actually pretty good for someone like you. So well done on not killing more.
You've heard a lot of client stories throughout this series, and you might be wondering if we could perhaps help you. Supporting people to shift is what we do best. Health is a journey, and we can help you to navigate this with one-on-one support with our clinical naturopaths, hypnotherapists and counsellors. If working with us one-on-one interests you, go to theshiftclinic.com and click on Shift with Us.
The Shift!
Now, you're an author of multiple books. For starters, why did you decide to write a book, and what led you to kind of write a couple more?
I wrote the world's first SIBO cookbook, SIBO Summer Cookbook, really as a desire to help others. When I went through my SIBO treatment and I followed the SIBO biphasic diet, I was overwhelmed with it, and I'm a foodie and I love to cook. And I thought, well, if I find this challenging, how will the person that can't cook or isn't confident in the kitchen going to cope? It originally started as a PDF document that I put together for my naturopath as a gift to say thanks for your help. And I said, here are some recipes that I created. You can give them to your patients. And then people started contacting me and saying, where can I buy the book? And I'm like, oh, okay, I better print a book then. And so I created the first cookbook, and then very quickly I was so compelled to help that I wrote the second and third cookbooks. So I wrote 3 cookbooks in the course of 12 months.
Whoa.
I was a woman possessed. Like I said, I don't do anything by halves. And it was great that they were then a resource for people from all around the world to be able to be told they've got SIBO, follow this diet, and then here are some recipes that they can follow. And it just takes that overwhelm away. So when you get to the kitchen, you don't think, what the hell am I going to cook? You've got recipes to follow.
So tell me about the recipes. What makes them special?
Firstly, they're the only recipes in the world that follow the biphasic diet. I'm, at this point in time, the exclusive author for that protocol. They're all categorised by what phase of the biphasic diet they follow, and they're all really delicious and tasty. The first book's about summer recipes. I really believe in eating produce when it's in season. So, and I wrote the book in summer, so hence why it was the summer theme. And my second book, SIBO Family Favourites, partly came about because I had a lot of mums contact me and say, I love the SIBO summer book, but what about food that I can cook for the whole family? So that book has classic family recipes like spag bowl or chicken parmigiana or, you know, fish and things you can cook for your whole family. You can then add extra things, like you could do a side of onion or garlic or potatoes or rice or pasta and add it to your family's meals if they can tolerate those things. And then you know that you only have to cook one meal, it saves you time, and then everybody gets to eat food. And the best compliment for me was when I started getting emails from mums saying that their kids' new favourite recipes were some of mine out of my cookbook, because that just means the world to me, that kids are loving my food. And then the third cookbook is the SIBO Holiday Cookbook, and it's designed to help people at festive times of the year cook, you know, food you wouldn't eat every day that's more special. It might be a little bit more kind of luxurious to what you'd eat on an everyday basis, but it's food you can turn up to Christmas or Thanksgiving or Easter or a special birthday. Bring a plate and no one needs to know it's a special diet meal. It's delicious, regardless of whether it's SIBO or not.
Can you tell me, what is your SIBO journey?
I have, as I've said, I've experienced digestive problems my whole life. I didn't know about SIBO until 3.5 years ago, and it came about through, you know, as I said, I'd been gluten and dairy free. That had provided an enormous relief to my digestive symptoms, and they were chronic constipation. I've always been constipated my whole life. And for me, that meant going to the toilet maybe once or twice a week if I was lucky. And as a kid, my strategy for coping with that was to eat cheese. So when I hadn't been to the toilet for some time, I'd go and eat a piece of cheese, and I'd eat the cheese walking to the toilet because it would give me instant diarrhea. Once my body had assimilated with going gluten and dairy free, and I started to really tune in with my symptoms, I realised I was still getting a lot of heartburn and bloating. The constipation piece hadn't resolved. And I felt that there was more to my picture than just gluten and dairy. I went and saw a dietitian who put me on an exclusion diet and had me eating white rice and white potatoes, which was fuel to my fire, and it made me so much worse. She then, suggested I might be fructose intolerant, but nothing she did really worked with me. I then was back on my own, swimming through the wilderness, going to GPs and doctors, and they were doing blood tests. Every blood test said that I was in perfect health. There was nothing wrong. And it was out of complete frustration. One night I was on Dr. Google searching, what does constant bloating mean and why can't I go to the toilet? And a naturopath here in Melbourne, Australia, her name kept appearing in articles, and I looked her up. She was near where I worked. I went in to see her and I said, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I feel really sick. And the doctors are telling me that I'm in good health, but I know something's wrong and I'm just desperate for answers. And after being told that there was nothing wrong with me for all those years, some of the first words she said to me were the most powerful, and they were, I believe you, and I'm going to try and get to the bottom of it with you. And I was in tears in her clinic because she was the first person that said she believed me.
How did that make you feel, having that acknowledged?
Well, it felt that I was seen and that I wasn't crazy, because some doctors had basically implied that I was a crazy lady and it was all in my head. And I knew it wasn't. And having her assurance that we could keep looking into it. And she did some initial testing. I was incredibly deficient in so many vitamins and minerals. She immediately supplemented me with the correct things. I felt so good straight away. And then we did a SIBO breath test and it came back positive. And to finally have a name to what was going on in my gut was so liberating and empowering, because I felt like I had something finally. It was really great to have a name to my tummy troubles. So we did the SIBO breath test. It came back positive. I was positive for hydrogen-dominant SIBO, and at the moment we can test for hydrogen and methane SIBO. She put me onto the SIBO biphasic diet by Dr. Narala Jacobi, and she put me on a range of herbal remedies which were designed to reduce the overgrowth of bacteria in my small intestine. And this was at a time where the knowledge around SIBO was still pretty new. It still is new, but we know more than we did 3.5 years ago. So I followed the biphasic diet, which is a very low fermentable diet, meaning the food you eat is not easily absorbed or consumed by the bacteria. So the symptoms are reduced. So my bloating went away pretty quickly, and the herbs then killed off the excess. And I found myself able to go to the toilet, and suddenly I had a flatter tummy. I was losing centimetres around my waist because I wasn't so bloated all the time. And I felt so much better. Even though I was still gluten and dairy free, I felt like a new woman. And the really big thing for me was the brain fog. I didn't realise how much brain fog I experienced until it ceased. And it was like a veil lifting off from my eyes, and I felt like I could suddenly see clearly again. And it was like my brain had all this extra processing power that I never knew existed. So I wasn't sleeping a lot because I was so energetic. My brain was going 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was launching the healthy gut, and I just felt so invigorated and alive. And it was a wonderful moment in time.
Isn't it amazing how much you take for granted being able to do a poo every day?
I didn't realise how good doing a poo every day feels until I started going to the toilet every day.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, that people don't want to talk about. And as naturopaths, we talk about poo every day, over dinner, any day of the week. But it's something that people it's a really good indicator of health, By not pooing every day, that means all of those toxins, all of that stuff's just accumulating and sitting in there. So that's really, really important. So the journey didn't end there for you, did it? What happened then?
So I went through my SIBO treatment, typical type A personality. I was like, I'm going to do this the best. I'm going to be the best patient she's ever seen. I'll do it the fastest. But I didn't pay any attention to prevention and then maintenance as well. All I was focused and fixated on was the killing and the treatment phase of SIBO. I didn't appreciate that SIBO is a condition that is really just a symptom of other things going wrong. I saw it as a condition in and of itself. So when I cleared my SIBO the first time, I actually went to France after that, and I was like, whoop, whoop, and I ate croissants and baguettes, and I was like, look at me, I can eat gluten again. And I came home, I had fatigue from all of the testing and the treatment. I didn't want to know about SIBO. I didn't want to think about my gut. And I didn't do anything beyond that. And then slowly symptoms started to return. And the first thing for me was the constipation piece and then the bloating. And it was around this time that I started to think, well, I think I need to look at what's going on in my body. Why did I get SIBO? And I learnt about adhesions and internal scarring. I flew myself to America to attend a SIBO conference so I could learn more about it. And the last speaker on the last day talked about adhesions. And I was in tears as I realised that was me, that I was the woman that's had multiple surgeries, that I most likely had adhesions wrapping around my intestinal system, that not one single doctor in all of the times I've had surgeries ever said to me that the risk of internal scarring is extremely high when they cut into you, and that could cause future complications. And I was really angry about it and, upset but relieved, thinking this is me. And my SIBO relapsed. And I was really disheartened that I'd built this whole business around SIBO and I'd been standing on rooftops singing about clearing it, and suddenly it had come back. And I felt like a failure. I felt really depressed that I had it again after everything that I'd done.
What decision did you make in that moment?
Well, after wallowing in a little bit of self-pity for a little bit of time, I realised that me owning that whole experience was the most important part, and talking about it so that others felt that they weren't failures when their SIBO returned. And so I started talking about how I felt with my community, and that was really powerful. I also flew myself I was back in the States. I contacted the leading adhesion specialists, Larry and Belinda Wern from Clear Passage, and I said, if I come to Florida, will you assess me and tell me if I've got adhesions? So at least I know whether this is something I need to look into. And they graciously hosted me in Florida, and they did a very preliminary assessment on me, and they were like, whoa, you've got scarring everywhere. This is a piece of your puzzle.
And how did they assess that?
Through manual therapy. So it was like having a deep tissue massage on my tummy. Like very gentle, it didn't hurt. And they were really just feeling around. Now, when I feel my tummy, it just feels like my tummy because it's what it's always felt like. But they have felt, thousands and thousands of different stomachs. They know what a constricted stomach feels like versus a free stomach. And they could feel, I've got one mass that's the size of a broccoli head over where my appendix ruptured, and also where I've got a lot of endometriosis. So that's around the site of my ileocecal valve. So that's an important juncture between small and large intestine. So my strategy at that moment then was not so much to focus on the killing stage of the SIBO treatment, but to focus on prevention and to address the underlying causes rather than just keep whacking my body with these killing agents, because I'm really worried about the long-term use of antibiotics and herbal antibiotics. What are they going to do to me long-term? well, let's spend my hard-earned money. I don't have an unlimited pot of funds. I would rather spend that money on treating the core root of what's going on rather than putting Band-Aids.
So there's a couple of things I want to touch on there, because one of the things you said was looking at SIBO not as a condition, as a symptom. And I think because it's quite new and it's quite buzzy and it's that kind of thing, that it's sort of like this new thing. And I feel like it's overdiagnosed a little bit and overtreated a little bit. And certainly we see a lot of patients that have come in and they've seen an integrative doctor and they've gone, oh, you've got SIBO, here's some antibiotics. Oh, now you've got SIFO, because that's put everything out of balance. Because to us, naturopathically, dysbiosis is something we've been treating for years. But I think with SIBO, it's just we're getting a little bit more clever in what we know about the digestive system and what we're actually, looking at. And, it's such early days, and the testing actually is quite rudimentary for what we know. We can say that, there's too much bacteria, but we don't know what type. We don't know how long to treat for, what to treat with, and that type of thing. So it's taking that whole holistic approach. You speak to a lot of people with SIBO, a lot of doctors, a lot of researchers. How do you see that playing out, where people are sort of treating it as this specific thing they need to kill rather than a holistic problem?
I think we're going to look back at this time in SIBO knowledge and be aghast at how we've approached it. I work with a lot of SIBO patients one-on-one. I'm a SIBO health coach, and one of the first things we do when I start working with someone is to look at what are the potential causes for your SIBO and how can you work with your medical practitioners to start addressing them. So obviously there's structural issues, but there's such a big piece with emotion. And I see so many people like myself where type A, we can be quite highly strung, we're perfectionists. There's a lot of stress and pressure in our lives, and that has such a big impact on the gut. So if we're only addressing our gut through antibiotics or antimicrobials, and we are not addressing our stress, we're not addressing the negative or toxic relationships in our life, we're not addressing our impaired relationship with food, if we're not sleeping enough, how on earth can we ask our body to return to health? And I'm not seeing these conversations with enough practitioners. There's too many conversations about this is a 3-month protocol and this is how we'll do it. It's not about let's think about how your body started to fail and let's try and step backwards to repair all of those failings. I'm yet to meet one person with SIBO that just has SIBO for SIBO alone. They've got multiple factors at play, and we need to address all of them.
How we feel colours our days. If we're emotional, anxious, low, or have low self-esteem, it severely impacts on our lives. In Season 2 of The Shift, we'll explore our minds, the neurochemistry, the biology, the emotions, and the subconscious. You don't want to miss this, so be sure to subscribe so that you know when it drops.
The Shift!
Tell me about treatment fatigue.
So when you're dealing with a relapsing condition like SIBO, or a condition that can often be challenging to treat because the underlying cause or causes isn't being addressed, you can feel like you're stuck on this never-ending merry-go-round of treatment. And it's really common for people with digestive conditions to be completely fatigued by the whole process. And I got there. I didn't want to think about treatment ever again because I was so sick of talking about it, of reading about it. And because I'm all or nothing, when I'm doing something, it's 100%. And when I was fatigued, I was 0%. I just wanted to go and eat burgers and fries. Even though I don't normally want to eat burgers and fries, I just wanted to go and be what I'd consider like the average person. So one of the things I've learned about myself through this whole process is that it's yin and yang. It's cycles. It's like summer and winter. We can't be in summer 24/7. We can't be in daylight 24/7. We actually need to allow downtime. We need to allow the darkness. We need to allow rest to then find the strength to go back into another phase or the next chapter of our experience or our treatment. if I tried to be perfect 100% of the time, I would actually not get very far. So what I now do is I now allow myself the downtime, and I say, okay, Rebecca, well, now you're in your downtime. Now you're in the yin. It's the yin and the yang. So you're in the dark phase, but you're going to emerge into the light phase when you're ready. And when you're ready, I'm ready to go there too. And that's given me empowerment to know that I don't have to be perfect 100% of the time. And so now I'm in this phase where I'm feeling really motivated, and I gain a lot of weight with SIBO. I gained 20 kilos with the last round of SIBO, which is significant weight when you're only 5'5" or 167 centimetres like I am. And I was falling at the top end of the overweight category, and that was really bothering me because I felt so uncomfortable. So now I'm in this zone where I'm really focused on getting that excess weight off, feeling really positive. But I recognize that will come to an end at some point, and when it does, that will be okay, and I can sit in that for the moment and then go back into whatever the next chapter is.
How do you see your journey moving forward?
One of the things that I'm focused on with my health is that it's just small incremental steps towards being as healthy as I can be, but it doesn't have to be about perfection, which is a challenge for someone like me. I really, really want to be a healthy older lady. I don't want to be frail with brittle bones, someone that's falling over or bedridden. And I recognise that in order to become that healthy 85-year-old Rebecca, I need to do lots of little things today. And an analogy I often refer to is that instead of looking at the top of Mount Everest and seeing how far you've got to climb, I look down at the meadow where I'm standing today, and there's beautiful sunflowers and green grass, and I'm going to enjoy what I can see down in the valley below rather than focusing on the summit of Mount Everest. Because if I look at how far I've still got to go, it seems insurmountable. But if I can just sit with what I've achieved today, and what I have achieved today is I've got 10 kilos off my frame. I have significantly improved health. I don't spend 2 weeks to 4 weeks in bed every winter. The last couple of winters, I haven't even got sick. When I do have a flare of anything, be it a histamine reaction or have a SIBO flare, now rather than freaking out over it, I go, wow, isn't this so interesting? Thank you so much, body, for telling me that thing, whatever it is that's happening to me. And I look at it and I see how I can learn from it. And I'm so much more in tune with my body than I've ever been, and that's really empowering, and I'm really excited by that. And I know in 5 years' time I will be so much more in tune and advanced to where I am today, and I'm just excited about what I will learn and where I will go. And even with all my flaws and challenges, I think that, you know, I can still learn from them. Like with the disordered eating, I acknowledge that I now am a person with disordered eating, but what can I learn from it? How can I help others with it? And how can I be a better person because of it?
Do you think you'll always be a person with disordered eating?
I'm not sure. I think it could be part of my picture. But I'd like to think that in the future it won't be as controlling, and that I can find a happier balance or a happier medium. But by the same token, I also acknowledge that I am all or nothing. So perhaps that won't be part of my picture, and it's just more about acknowledgement of some of these quirks that make me Rebecca Coombes, and just sitting with them and finding a happy place where I can be, and looking for the triggers that mean a person like me with disordered eating, this is an okay place to be in, and then these are the places you need to be careful of. So real food restriction or binging and purging, they're places I don't want to go to, but focusing on a healthy diet with diversity and lots of plant-based foods, I'm okay to sit there.
How can people get more in tune with their bodies?
I think journaling or writing down is a really great start. I regularly hear from people who say, I have no way of knowing what my symptoms are. I don't think I get any symptoms. We've got a food and mood diary at the Healthy Gut that I give people, and that's where you literally just write down how you're feeling as the day goes on and what you eat. And I had a client who used to have a cup of coffee every morning and have a cracking headache every morning. And she said, I never knew that my headache started after my coffee. And I said, well, maybe try a morning without coffee and have some herbal tea or have some water. Just see what happens. And she did that and she's like, oh, I didn't get that headache. And it had been her picture for years. So I think writing down how you feel can be good because as the picture changes, you forget really easily what you used to feel like. And when you look back on what you've written, you go, oh my gosh, remember when I used to get that rash every single day and I don't get that anymore? Or remember when I used to only go to the toilet once a week and now I go every morning at 8 a.m?
It's really interesting because we get this a lot in clinic and when we're guiding people through this journey. And as you know, the journey can be like 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, ongoing forever. And it's where this journey fatigue kind of sometimes sets in because people, they feel a bit better but they're still not getting quite there, yeah? So they might have one niggling thing and often it's things like I haven't lost the amount of weight that I want to, or it's their one symptom. But when you look back, there's so many different things that have changed and that you will forget that unless you get reminded. So I think writing it down and actually celebrating those wins is really, really important as well because we have this negative bias where we tend to focus on the bad things that are happening and not the good things that are happening, which then can create more of the same. So that's a really powerful conversation, I think. So tell me, what's been the biggest shift that you've made in your life?
My biggest shift has been changing towards health. So moving away from an unhealthy way of living through lots of drugs and alcohol and hanging around with people that aren't very good for me to feeling empowered and standing, firmly in my own 2 feet and saying that I'm worth being healthy. And that's been my biggest shift because I never thought I was worthy enough to be healthy in the past. And now I know I am.
That's a really big statement. So it's looking at, do you think that you need a certain amount of self-love to actually want to look after yourself?
I think you do. I think you need to stop hating yourself. I know this from first-hand experience, and to start liking yourself. You don't have to just go from hate to love. But if you start liking yourself and being proud of the body you inhabit, you may not have, supermodel legs or you might not have a flat tummy, but those legs can help you walk and that tummy can help you digest food, even if it's not perfect. But you are worth feeling good and living the healthiest life that you can possibly live.
I love it. What do you think makes people ready to make the shift?
Being ready to shift often comes out of hardship. You're often at your darkest hour, your lowest point, when you realise it's time to change. And when I went looking for answers as to why my gut was so problematic, I was feeling miserable. I couldn't live like that any longer, and that was the impetus for change. With all the weight that I gained with my recent SIBO relapse, the impetus for change and a shift for me was that I couldn't fit into any clothes anymore and I refused to go to the next size up. So there's often something that happens, or you might see a photo of yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, when did I get to that point? And that's often a really, it's hard, but it can be a really strong motivating factor. But what I will say is that you need to find other reasons to keep you going through your shift other than perhaps what you look like, because you're not going to see results overnight. It can take weeks, months, years to get to where you want to be. And if you're looking for quick solutions, you can lose motivation very easily. So again, writing down. So what I've got is I've written down all of my big goals. So I want to be healthy at 85. I want to live into my hundreds. I want to be at least 100, if not older. And then I break that down into teeny tiny little goals. So how am I going to do that? And that's through, eating 40 different plant foods a week. It's drinking 3 litres of water every day. It's moving my body in some capacity every day. It's finding joy and happiness in every day and finding time to laugh, normally with my dog because he's just mad. And so all those teeny tiny little things lead to my big goals, and that's what keeps me going.
If you could give people just one piece of advice to make a shift in their life, what would it be?
To make a shift in yourself and your life, I think the first step is to believe that you are worth it. Because if you don't believe you're worth it, it makes it very difficult to start that change. You are totally worth feeling better, feeling happy, feeling healthy, feeling glad to wake up every day, feeling happy to go to work. And if you're not feeling those things, have a look at what needs to change. If you wake up and feel miserable about going to work, well, perhaps work needs to change. Or if you're waking up feeling unloved because your relationship doesn't fulfill you, perhaps it's time for that relationship to change. It doesn't mean that making the shift is always going to be easy, but you are worth living the best life that you can live. And it's what I've been working on, and I'm really glad that I've made all of the many shifts that I've made to get me where I am today and where I will end up in the future.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time.
We covered a lot of ground in this interview, so let's go back over some of the key points. Number 1. SIBO is often associated with endometriosis due to inflammation, scarring and adhesions that impair the natural movement of the bowel. This can lead to migration of bacteria into the small intestine and therefore SIBO development. Number 2, you can't underestimate the role of emotional health in healing, and especially when it comes to SIBO and other gut conditions. Acknowledging this part of yourself and seeking support to begin to move through it is absolutely essential. I've helped thousands of people, and what I've learned is that the emotional side of things is often more important than the food you eat. We talk more about this on episode 13 of season 1 of The Shift, which is called Emotions, Beliefs and the Psychology of Food. Number 3, disordered eating can occur in many ways. From eating disorders like anorexia, overeating or binging, restrictive diets, and even an unhealthy obsession with eating perfectly healthy. Our attitude towards food is so important, but it's often overlooked. We need to develop healthy relationships with food, or else we'll create stress around eating, which ends up impairing our digestive process even more. Okay, learning is great, but doing is better. Here are 3 things you could do as a result of listening to this episode. Number 1. First of all, if any of the themes in this episode resonated with you or brought up anything for you, please seek some support and talk to someone about it. Support is something that I bring up a lot, and you would have heard Rebecca say how important it was to her in her healing journey. Touch base with your relevant therapist or contact the team at Shift and we can steer you in the right direction. Number 2, to avoid SIBO development, we want to try and protect the natural microbiome of the gut as much as possible. Having a travel plan to prevent and treat bugs that may lead to traveller's diarrhea is a great idea. I travel with probiotics and slippery elm powder to help my gut while I'm away, and I would encourage you to do the same. Number 3, if you have issues affecting multiple areas of you, it's important to build a holistic health team. This might be doctors and naturopaths that can help to address your symptoms, and emotional wellness experts that can help you to uncover the hidden parts of you that may be contributing to your current mental state. See healing as a journey that we're always on, and relapses simply as bumps in the road. I truly believe that there is so much wisdom to be gained from the healing process. So as hard as it is to be in it, you know that you can come out the other side being a better and stronger version of yourself. Thank you again to Rebecca for being so courageous to share her story with us on The Shift. To find out more about her, visit thehealthygut.com, where you'll find a heap of recipes and resources to help you shift. If you love this episode, please share it and tag us on social media so we can hear what you have to say. In the next episode of The Shift, we have celebrity chef and New York restaurateur Dan Churchill, who offers us some great practical advice to eating healthy while feeling gourmet.
Coming up on The Shift.
So it's not difficult for people to eat healthy, right?
No, I don't believe so at all. I think it's difficult for people who've never done it before to get motivated.
Why don't you like using the word fuel?
Because I think it serves the wrong connotations to what food is.
So what would you recommend people to use instead of sugar?
Look, I think the natural sugars and things personally are enough, and when we start to wean off adding sugar, you'll start to find there's a whole new area of our flavour palette that opens up.
I hope you're loving the information in the shift as much as I do. But maybe you're thinking, what do I need to do for me? Take our online assessment to discover what your gut is up to. Go to theshiftclinic.com/quiz.